I never should have come to the Moonstone Summit. Omegas like me belonged at the edges of gatherings like this silent, invisible serving wine to alphas who never looked twice. Not standing beneath chandeliers carved from antler and bone, while the most powerful wolves in the northern Rockies circled each other with smiles sharp enough to draw blood. The Great Hall of Fort Valor stretched 5,000 square feet of polished stone and timber, every surface gleaming under crystal lights that cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. 200 alphas filled the space, their combined dominance pressing against my skin like a physical weight. CEOs of timber empires worth hundreds of millions. Owners of mining operations that scarred whole mountains. Alphas whose territories sprawled across Montana and Idaho like personal kingdoms, each one controlling more wealth than entire towns. I kept my head down, brown contacts hiding violet eyes that would mark me as cursed. Cheap dye from a truck stop bathroom covered silver white hair that would scream what I really was. The black servant's dress hung loose on my frame, 105 pounds, stretched over a 5'4" skeleton, 12 years of wolfsbane poisoning, having eaten away everything my body tried to build. 3 more hours. Just 3 more hours and I could disappear back to the Super 8 motel where I'd been hiding for 6 months. Back to being Emma Harris. Nobody Omega who cleaned casino floors at the Silver Ridge for $9 an hour and kept her head down. The crystal wine glass felt too heavy in my trembling hand. Waterford, probably. Worth more than my weekly wages. That's when I felt it. That familiar prickling at the back of my neck that used to mean bruises and broken bones and nights locked in concrete darkness. The sensation that said predator, watching prey. My wolf stirred for the first time in months, a weak flutter beneath 12 years of poison, barely alive but screaming danger. I turned slowly, every instinct telling me to run. Damien Frost stood between 2 stone pillars, half swallowed by shadow. 35 years old and still as beautiful as a blade-sharp features, perfectly tailored Armani suit that probably cost $8,000, and cold eyes that had once promised me the world before showing me what hell actually looked like. The scar across his jaw caught the torchlight. The one I'd given him 6 months ago when my shadows finally exploded and I'd thrown him through the wall of his office at the Silver Ridge Casino, leaving a Damien-shaped hole in the drywall and my chance at freedom. That possessive smile curved his lips. The one that still haunted my nightmares. I could almost hear his voice across the 50 feet separating us. You're mine, Serafina. No one else will ever want a broken Omega who smells of storm and shadow. You can run to the ends of the earth. I'll always find you. You know I will. Panic clawed at my chest with iron fingers. If he exposed what I really was, if the wrong person sensed the darkness coiled beneath my skin, like a serpent waiting to strike, I wouldn't survive the night. Dark Omegas had been hunted to extinction 300 years ago, slaughtered by alphas who feared what they couldn't control, who couldn't bear the idea of an Omega with power that rivaled their own. The ones who survived learned to hide. I'd been hiding since I was 12 years old. The wine glass slipped from my numb fingers. It shattered against stone, the sound impossibly loud in a sudden pocket of silence. Red wine, a 2015 Chateau Margaux that probably cost $500 a bottle, spread like blood across white marble. My hand throbbed where a silver shard had embedded itself in my palm, burning like acid against my skin. I stumbled backward and hit something solid. A wall. A mountain. A force of nature wrapped in skin and muscle. A large hand steadied my elbow, impossibly warm through the thin fabric of my sleeve. The touch sent electricity racing up my arm, made my wolf lift her head for the first time in years, made something in my chest pull tight. Careful. The voice rumbled like distant thunder, deep enough to vibrate through my bones. I looked up and up, into eyes the color of winter storms framed by a face carved from granite and violence. 6'4" of raw power, 240 pounds of controlled lethality. Black hair pulled into warrior braids that fell past broad shoulders, encased in tactical black. A jagged scar ran along a jaw that looked like it could crack diamonds. The Alpha King. Riker Stone, whose name was spoken like both prayer and curse across every territory in the Northwest. The wolf who'd inherited $800 million worth of Montana wilderness at 18 when his father was assassinated in a challenge gone wrong. Who'd built a reputation so brutal they called him the Stone King, 15 years without a smile, 10 years of legendary control that made other alphas look like children playing at dominance. I'd never been this close to him before. Never wanted to be. His scent hit me like a physical blow. Cedar and gunpowder and winter storms rolling across high mountains. Alpha concentrated into its purest, most dangerous form, the kind of scent that made Omegas bare their throats instinctively. My wolf didn't cower. She sang. His eyes narrowed, nostrils flaring slightly as he scented me in return. Something flashed across his face too quickly to read surprise recognition, something darker. Damien was moving through the crowd toward us, 20 feet away. 15. That predatory smile widening. Desperation shredded what remained of my pride. Please kiss me. The words tumbled out in a whisper that cracked halfway through. My ex is watching. Riker Stone's gaze shifted past me, tracked Damien's approach with the cold assessment of a sniper acquiring a target. Those winter storm eyes returned to mine, and I watched something dangerous slide behind them. Not anger, calculation. His smile came slow as poison, sharp as broken glass. Well, he said, voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. That's interesting. One hand slid around my waist, pulling me against a body that felt like it was carved from stone and wrapped in heat. The other cupped the back of my neck, fingers threading through hair I'd tried so hard to disguise warm and possessive. The great hall went silent. 200 conversations died mid-word. Every alpha, beta, and omega in that massive space turned to stare. The clink of champagne glasses ceased. The rustle of expensive fabrics stopped. Riker Stone bent his head and claimed my mouth. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was possessive, demanding a brand pressed into flesh that would leave a mark long after the contact ended. His lips moved against mine with the confidence of someone who'd never been denied anything in his life, who expected the world to bend when he applied pressure. But underneath the dominance was something else. Something that felt almost like reverence, like he was handling something precious that might shatter if he gripped too hard. His hand on my neck was firm but careful. His arm around my waist supportive rather than constraining. My wolf howled. The sound echoed through my mind at 12 years of enforced silence breaking like a dam. Power stirred in my blood shadows that had been suppressed by poison and terror, and Damien's silver whip finally sensing freedom, finally tasting possibility. Riker's hand tightened on my neck. Warning or encouragement, I couldn't tell. When he finally pulled back, the silence in the hall was absolute. 200 wolves stood, frozen champagne glasses halfway to mouths, conversations, abandoned eyes wide with shock that bordered on disbelief. The Alphaking, the wolf whose name was synonymous with isolation and control, who hadn't been seen with a woman in his 15-year reign, who'd turned down arranged marriages with daughters of powerful alphas, had just kissed a nobody Omega servant in front of the entire Moonstone summit. Well, Riker said again, his voice carrying easily through the shock quiet. One arm still curved around my waist like he'd been holding me for years, like this was natural, like I belonged there. That settles it, doesn't it, Marcus? I followed his gaze to a massive alpha near the dais, 6'6" of barely contained rage silver, streaking through dark hair, hands clenched into fists that looked like they could break concrete blocks in half. Alpha Marcus Thorne, who controlled the Eastern Valleys and the $50 million timber operation that came with them, who'd been arguing territory disputes with Riker for 3 years. Marcus's jaw worked, tendons standing out in his neck like steel cables. Settles what exactly? The matter of whose jurisdiction the Eastern Valleys fall under. Riker's tone was almost bored, but I felt the tension in his frame coiled and ready to strike like a rattlesnake. You claim no Omega bloodlines tied your pack to those lands. Clearly, I've just discovered one that interests me. Understanding crashed through me like ice water dumped over my head. He hadn't kissed me out of kindness. He'd kissed me to make a point, to claim a connection to bloodlines that would justify his interference in a territory dispute worth millions, to force a political stalemate using my body as the chess piece. I was nothing but a pawn moved into position. The valleys stay neutral ground. Riker continued, each word deliberate and final, until we resolved the lineage question. All logging operations suspended. 50 million in timber rights on hold until further notice. Brilliant, ruthless, absolutely calculated. Marcus looked like he wanted to challenge right there, wanted to shift and tear Riker's throat out, consequences be damned. But 3 other alphas were already nodding, relieved to avoid bloodshed tonight. The political landscape had just shifted like tectonic plates, and everyone in the hall was recalculating their positions, their alliances, their next moves. Who is she? Someone called out from the crowd, voice sharp with curiosity. Riker's thumb brushed reassuring patterns against my hip, a gesture so casual and possessive that my traitorous body leaned into it, seeking more of that warmth, that steadiness. An Omega under my protection. That's all anyone needs to know. His gaze swept the hall wolf, sliding behind human pupils until his eyes flashed with inner light. Anyone who wishes to dispute that is welcome to do so, privately. The threat in those last words could have frozen fire. I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Damien stepping forward from the shadows, his face twisted with fury barely concealed beneath a veneer of civility. Damien, who'd found me after 6 months of running, who'd tracked me across 3 states and a dozen dead-end jobs. Our eyes met across the hall, and I saw the promise there. This isn't over, Serafina. You're still mine. You'll always be mine. But Riker's beta, a scarred warrior with ice-blue eyes and a face that looked like it had stopped caring about pain decades ago, was already moving to intercept. The beta positioned himself between Damien and the dais with the casual efficiency of someone who'd killed before and wouldn't hesitate to do it again. Words were exchanged too low for me to hear over the resuming buzz of conversation, but I saw Damien's hands clench. Damien's hands clenched into fists. For a moment, I thought he'd do something stupid, something that would turn this political theater into actual violence, blood on marble challenges and death. Then his eyes found mine again. That cold smile returned, the one that promised pain, delivered slowly, methodically over days and weeks. He retreated, melting back into the crowd with one last burning look that made my stomach turn, that made old scars ache. Breathe. Riker's voice came quiet against my ears, so soft only I could hear, intimate in a way that made my skin prickle. He can't touch you here. I hadn't realized I'd stopped breathing. My lungs dragged in air that tasted like cedar and gunpowder, and the champagne someone had spilled during the spectacle, expensive French vintage wasted on marble. The court slowly came back to life around us, conversations resuming in hushed, excited tones. Alphas repositioning themselves like wolves reassessing pack hierarchy after a challenge, figuring out who stood where now, who had leverage, who'd lost ground. I'd become the story everyone would tell tomorrow, the nameless Omega who'd caught the Alpha King's attention, the symbol of his favor, his protection, his interest. Symbols in the Moonstone Court rarely lived long. Can you walk? Riker asked, still in that low, private voice that somehow felt more intimate than the kiss. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Good. His hand moved from my waist to catch my elbow. We're leaving before someone does something stupid. He guided me through the crowd with the inexorable force of a glacier carving through stone, unstoppable and patient. Wolves parted before us, some bowing, others staring with naked calculation, mentally filing away information to use later. I felt their eyes cataloging everything. My plain dress from a thrift store in Kalispell, my moon-pale skin that hadn't seen enough sun, the way my hand trembled slightly against the Alpha King's forearm. Measuring, judging, wondering what I'd done to capture his attention and how they might use it. The walk to the throne room's side exit felt endless. The beta fell into step behind us, a silent guardian. 2 more warriors materialized from alcoves I hadn't noticed, forming an escort that made my pulse hammer. This was real. I wasn't just leaving the hall. I was being taken somewhere. My private wing, Riker said, answering the question I hadn't asked. We need to talk, little Omega. The endearment should have felt condescending. Instead, it felt almost protective. Starting with why your ex looks at you like you're his property, Riker continued, and why your scent just shifted from lavender and rain to something that tastes like a thunderstorm about to break. My secret. He'd sensed it during the kiss. That darkness in my blood that marked me as wrong, as dangerous, as something that shouldn't exist in a world where alphas ruled and omegas submitted. I can explain, I whispered. You'd better. He glanced down at me, and for the first time I saw something other than calculated control in those winter storm eyes. Curiosity, warning, and beneath it all a flicker of something that might have been concern. Because that kiss just painted a target on both our backs, he said quietly. And I need to know exactly what I'm protecting. The corridor stretched ahead, lit by electric sconces designed to look like torches, all modern technology disguised as medieval ambiance. Behind us, the Great Hall buzzed with fresh gossip and political maneuvering. Ahead, the Alpha King's private domain waited, and with it all the questions I'd spent 6 months running from. I'd begged a stranger to kiss me to escape my past. Instead, I just chained myself to the most powerful and dangerous wolf in the realm. The Alpha King's fortress was carved into the mountain itself. All dark stone and iron that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it, designed to intimidate, to remind visitors that Riker Stone ruled from a position of impregnable strength. My footsteps echoed too loudly in corridors wide enough for 3 wolves to walk abreast, past tapestries depicting battles I didn't want to understand, wolves tearing into each other, blood and glory immortalized in thread. Riker hadn't spoken since we left the public halls. His silence felt heavier than questions, more oppressive than the stone walls closing in around us. We entered a circular chamber with windows cut directly into the mountainside, showing nothing but night sky and distant peaks silvered by moonlight. No glass, just open air, and the smell of pine carried on cold wind. A war table dominated the center, scattered with maps marked in red and blue territory, disputes laid out like a board game, where the pieces were lives and land. 4 people waited there. They all turned to assess me with expressions ranging from curiosity to outright hostility. My inner circle, Riker said simply. The only wolves in this fortress who will tell me the truth even when it's inconvenient. The scarred beta from earlier nodded curtly. Kieran, head of the King's Guard. His voice matched his face, rough, direct, no nonsense. A woman with clever eyes and ink-stained fingers that marked her as a scholar tilted her head, studying me like I was a problem to be solved. Lyra, senior advisor among other things. Her gaze dissected me, cataloged me, filed me away for future reference. A massive warrior with arms like tree trunks and a face that suggested his primary problem-solving method involved blunt force. Trauma grunted. Thorn, I hit things. Despite the threat in his size, something about his bluntness was almost comforting. Despite everything, I almost smiled. The last figure made my breath catch. She was ancient, wrapped in layers of dark fabric that might have been black, or might have been deepest purple. Might have been cloth, or might have been shadow. White eyes not clouded with age, but genuinely white pupils swallowed by opalescence turned toward me with the precision of someone who saw far more than the physical world. A seer. My wolf's instincts screamed to run. Mira sees what others don't, Riker said quietly. She'll want to touch you. It's how her gift works. No. The word escaped before I could stop it, sharp and final. Mira moved forward anyway, surprisingly quick for someone who looked like she'd witnessed the birth of mountains. Her gnarled hand reached for mine with the inevitability of fate. Every instinct I had roared in warning. But Kieran was already blocking the door, casual but deliberate, and Riker's presence at my back felt like a wall inescapable. I was trapped. The seer's fingers brushed my wrist. She went rigid, body locking like she'd been struck by lightning. Her white eyes widened, pupils dilating, until they swallowed the cloudiness, until they looked almost normal, except for the terrible knowing in them. Her mouth opened in a soundless gasp. When she spoke, her voice echoed like it came from the bottom of a well, from the depths of the earth itself. Shadow and storm, shadow and crown. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Frost crept across the war table's surface, spreading like infection, like crystallized prophecy. The dark Omega wakes where light has drowned. Mira's grip tightened painfully on my wrist, her ancient bones stronger than they had any right to be. She will shatter crowns or forge them. She will slaughter or she will save. The words hammered into me like physical blows, like pronouncements of fate I couldn't escape. The old bloodline remembers. The cursed queen returns. Power exploded from my core. Shadows erupted around me like living things, whipping through the chamber in tendrils of darkness that smelled of storms and ancient earth, of things that should have stayed buried. One lashed toward the window. The glass shrieked, a spiderweb of cracks spreading across its surface like the prophecy spreading through my life. Thorn swore and dove behind the war table. Lyra's papers scattered like startled birds' maps and intelligence reports flying. Serafina, Riker's voice cut through the chaos, commanding but not angry, the voice of someone used to controlling situations spiraling toward violence. Breathe, pull it back. I couldn't. The shadows were feeding on my panic, on the terror of being seen, of having my secret ripped into the open by an old woman's prophecy, by fate itself declaring what I was to a room full of people who could kill me. They coiled and struck like serpents, responding to emotions I couldn't control, had never been able to control. Riker moved. One moment he was behind me, the next his hands framed my face, forcing me to meet his eyes to focus. Look at me. An order, not a request. Nothing else, just me. Eyes like winter storms, steady and unyielding. An anchor in the chaos, solid when everything else was spinning apart. Breathe with me, he commanded. In, out, match my rhythm. I tried, focused on the warmth of his palms against my cheeks, rough with calluses. The way his chest rose and fell, in deliberate, measured breaths, a rhythm I could follow, could mirror. Slowly, painfully, the shadows began to recede. They slithered back toward me like reluctant children called home, sinking into my skin and leaving the chamber in sudden ringing silence that was somehow louder than the chaos. The window held barely. Everything else looked like a windstorm had torn through it. Maps scattered, furniture displaced, frost patterns etched into wood and stone. Mira had collapsed into a chair, trembling like someone who glimpsed the end of the world. Kieran watched me with new wariness, hand resting on his sword hilt, ready to draw. Lyra's expression had shifted to something uncomfortably close to awe, to fascination. Thorn just looked impressed, like I'd passed some kind of test. Well, Riker said, still holding my face, his thumb sweeping gentle arcs along my jaw. I think we're past pretending you're an ordinary Omega. Shame burned through me hot and familiar, the shame I'd carried for 12 years. I didn't mean to. I know. He released me slowly, giving me space, but staying close protective without being possessive. Sit down, all of you. We need answers, and terrorizing her won't get them. I sank into the nearest chair before my legs gave out. Riker took the seat across from me, elbows on his knees, studying me like I was a puzzle he intended to solve a problem that required careful strategy. Your ex, he said. How long were you bonded? 2 years. I swallowed hard around the words. It wasn't a choice. Lyra made a disgusted sound, papers still clutched in her ink-stained hands. Forced bonds are illegal in most territories. Laws only matter if someone enforces them. The bitterness in my voice could have stripped paint from walls. I reported it once, to the sheriff's office in Boise. The deputy was Damien's cousin. He laughed me out of the station, told me I should be grateful an Alpha wanted damaged goods. Riker's jaw tightened, but his voice remained carefully neutral. And the shadows, how long have you had them? Always, since I presented as Omega at 12. I twisted my fingers together, old habits dying hard. My pack said I was cursed. Wrong. That no Alpha would ever want. I cut myself off, the old shame choking me, 12 years of being told I was defective, broken, less than nothing. Your pack was full of idiots, Thorne rumbled from his position near the door, matter of fact about it. Riker shot him a quelling look before focusing back on me. Dark Omega bloodlines are rare. Most were hunted to extinction 3 centuries ago because Alphas feared what they couldn't control, couldn't dominate, couldn't own. His jaw worked, muscle ticking. Your ex knew what you were. It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. He discovered it accidentally. I was 22 working at his casino. A drunk Alpha got aggressive, tried to force me into a corner. I panicked and the shadows came out, threw him across the room without touching him. I stared at my hands, at the bandaged palm where the wine glass had cut me. Damien saw. Instead of turning me in, he said he could fix me, make me normal. I was stupid enough to believe him. The laugh that escaped was bitter as ash as 12 years of poison. He just wanted a weapon he could aim at his enemies. 2 years of training me to use the shadows on command. 2 years of punishment when I couldn't control them perfectly. And when you escaped, he swore he'd find me, that I belonged to him, power and all. I met Riker's gaze, saw something fierce there. He put a $20,000 bounty on me. Dead or alive, preferably alive. Tonight in the hall, I saw him watching me. And I knew if he got close enough to speak, to make a scene, someone would sense what I am. So you grabbed the nearest stranger and begged him to kiss you. Something that might have been amusement flickered across Riker's face, softening the harsh lines. For what it's worth, he said, that was either the bravest or most reckless thing I've seen in a decade. Reckless, Kieran muttered from the door. Definitely reckless. The prophecy, I whispered, looking at Mira. The seer had recovered somewhat, though she still looked shaken. Still looked like she'd seen something that terrified her. What did you see? Fragments. Mira's voice was hoarse, scraped raw. Nothing clear, nothing I can parse into meaning. But old magic recognizes you, child. You're tied to something that was broken long ago. Something that should have stayed buried. She paused, those white eyes turning toward Riker with terrible precision. And to him. The Alphaking's expression went carefully blank, a mask sliding into place. That's enough prophecy for one night. He stood, authority settling around him like a physical cloak, the mantle of kingship. Seraphina stays here under my protection. No one speaks of what they saw or heard in this room. Understood. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the inner circle, reluctant but absolute. As they filed out, Riker lingered, studying me with an intensity that made my skin prickle, that made me aware of every breath. Get some rest, he said. Tomorrow we start training you to control that power before it controls you. Why? The question escaped before I could stop it. Why help me? He paused in the doorway, backlit by corridor lights, more shadow than man. Because symbols in this court rarely live long, he said, echoing my own thought from earlier. And I don't let my people die, not if I can help it. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone in a chamber still marked by my shadows, wondering what exactly I'd become to the Alpha King. A symbol, a weapon, a chess piece in games I didn't understand, or something far more dangerous. Sleep didn't come. I lay in the massive bed, larger than any room I'd lived in for the past 6 months, soft in ways I'd forgotten beds could be, and stared at the ceiling. My hand throbbed where the wine glass had cut it, Someone had bandaged it while I wasn't paying attention, wrapped it in clean white gauze that probably cost more than a week of my wages at the Silver Ridge. Everything in this room cost more than I could comprehend. The sheets felt like water against my skin thread, count in the thousands. The mattress didn't have a single spring poking through worn fabric. The walls were actual stone, not concrete, painted to look nice, and they held heat instead of leaching it away like the basement in Boise, like every cheap motel room. I'd spent 12 years sleeping on a basement floor, 8 feet by 10 feet concrete in a single blanket. 2 years in Damien's house where luxury came with a price paid in bruises, in silver burns, and nights locked in the dark. 6 months in truck stop motels where the doors didn't lock properly, and every sound made me wake with my heart hammering, convinced he'd found me. This felt like a cage disguised as safety. I gave up on sleep around 3 in the morning and padded to the window. Fort Valor sprawled across the mountainside below a fortress city housing thousands of wolves. Lights glittered in the darkness like fallen stars, like a constellation spread across stone. Somewhere out there, Damien was planning his next move, and I'd just given him a target even he wouldn't have dared to aim at before. The Alpha King. You should be sleeping. I spun shadows rising instinctively before I could stop them, before I could think. Riker stood in the doorway I'd thought was locked, dressed in dark tactical pants and a black shirt that did nothing to hide the violence coiled in his frame. No armor now, no formal presentation, just a predator in his element. The door was locked, I said, shadows still coiling around my arms like smoke. It's my fortress. No door is locked to me. He moved into the room with that same inexorable force, like gravity had different rules for him, like the world bent to accommodate his presence. Can't sleep. Too much in my head. I let the shadows dissipate, pulled them back with effort. He nodded understanding in that small gesture. He came to stand beside me at the window, close enough that I could feel his heat, but not touching. Respecting boundaries I hadn't known I still had. We stood in silence for a long moment, watching the fortress lights. Your scent, he said finally. During the kiss, rain and wild honeysuckle and ozone like a storm rolling across high country like something wild and untamed. My breath caught in my throat. I've never smelled anything like it. He continued, voice quiet but intense. My wolf recognized something, wanted to claim it, protect it, keep it safe from everything that wants to hurt it. I'm not a thing to be kept. No, he turned to face me and the moonlight caught silver flecks in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. You're a woman who's been running for 6 months, who's been poisoned for 12 years, who just saved herself by making the most dangerous gamble I've ever witnessed. His hand lifted slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving me time to retreat if I wanted. I didn't. His fingers brushed my jaw, tilted my face toward the light with a gentleness that seemed impossible from hands I'd watched sign execution orders. Brown contacts, he murmured. Cheap dye. Baggy clothes to hide your frame. You've been trying very hard to disappear, to become invisible. It kept me alive. I know. His thumb swept along my cheekbone with unexpected tenderness. But you're not disappearing anymore. The moment I kissed you, you became visible. To everyone. To him. I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. He released my face, giving me space again. Tomorrow when you're arrested, we'll talk about what happens next. Your options. Options? I'm not Damien Frost. The name came out like a curse, like something foul. I don't own you, don't control you. That kiss was politics and protection, nothing more. If you want to leave a Fort Valor, I'll arrange transportation. New identity, money to start over somewhere, he'll never find you. Something in my chest twisted painfully. And if I stay, Riker's smile was slight, dangerous, full of dark promise. Then we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to master those shadows. How to break whatever hold Damien thinks he has on you. He moved toward the door, then paused, turned back. One more thing, Serafina Ashford. My real name spoken in his voice made my wolf stir and whimper. I know everything. Your pack in Boise, the Clearwater territory. The wolf's bane poisoning that should have killed you years ago. The forced bond. Your escape 6 months ago. The jobs at the truck stops along I-90. His winter storm eyes held mine. I've known since day 3. How? I'm the Alpha King. Information is power, and I don't make moves without knowing exactly what I'm playing with, what pieces are on the board. He paused. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for what happened to you. No one deserves that. He should have felt like a threat. Instead, somehow he felt like the first honest thing I'd encountered in years, the first person who'd told me the truth instead of pretty lies. Sleep, he said. Tomorrow we start training. Training for what? Survival, control, whatever comes next. He smiled sharp and promising. I told you, I don't let my people die. And you little Omega are officially one of my people now, whether you want to be or not. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but I didn't return to bed. Something felt wrong. The air tasted different, carried a scent that didn't belong. I stood at the window, exhaustion pulling at my edges, making my vision blur. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't fit the fortress's night rhythm. The whisper of a window opening in the corridor outside. Footsteps too light, too practiced, moving with professional stealth. The metallic click of a safety being released. My shadows exploded outward on pure instinct, on 12 years of survival reflexes. I was through my door before conscious thought caught up darkness, streaming from my hands like living smoke. Down the hallway, bare feet silent on cold stone. Around the corner, where three wolves in black tactical gear had Riker surrounded in his own corridor. Suppressors on their weapons, night vision goggles, professional-grade equipment, coordinated movement, assassins. The first shooter's finger tightened on the trigger weapon, aimed at Riker's head. My shadows caught the bullet mid-flight. Then the second, the third. 3 rounds suspended in darkness, spinning slowly like insects trapped in amber death, made visible and stopped. Riker moved with the fluid violence of an apex predator. His shift was instantaneous, human to wolf in a heartbeat, a massive black beast with storm gray eyes. He tore through the first assassin's throat before the others could process what had happened to their bullets, before they could understand that their advantage had vanished. Kieran appeared from a side passage, as if summoned blades flashing in the torchlight. Thorn materialized from another direction, shotgun roaring silver rounds turning flesh to pulp. It was over in seconds. 3 dead wolves, 3 failed assassins, blood spreading across expensive marble, and me standing in a corridor in my borrowed nightgown, holding bullets made of darkness and silver, trembling with adrenaline and power. Riker shifted back to human form, naked and covered in blood that wasn't his breathing hard. You saved my life, he said, voice rough with adrenaline and something else. Something that looked like wonder, like revelation. You saved mine first. I managed, shadows still coiling around my arms, protective and fierce, refusing to dissipate. Seems fair. He moved toward me slowly, giving me time to retreat, to process, to react. I didn't. His hand cupped my face, thumb, brushing my cheekbone with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence still painted across his skin. Thank you. You're welcome. We stood there in the blood-stained corridor, surrounded by bodies and witnesses, and something fundamental shifted between us. Something clicked into place like a key turning in a lock. I wasn't just under his protection anymore. We were protecting each other. Kieran to Riker said, not taking his eyes off me, find out who sent them. Lyra needs to trace the payment. Thorn security review of every entrance. Someone got 3 armed wolves into my private wing. On it, they chorused, already moving with efficient purpose. But Riker stayed still, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like the prophecy had just made sense in a way it hadn't before. Shadow and storm, he murmured, so quiet only I could hear. Maybe Mira saw more than fragments. Maybe she saw what we're becoming, I whispered back. His smile was small and fierce and full of possibility. Get some rest. Real rest this time. I'll post guards. Will you be safe? Will you, he countered, something warm flickering in his eyes. I think we both know the answer to that now. He nodded once, then finally retreated to his own chambers, leaving me in a hallway that smelled of blood and gunpowder, and the beginning of something neither of us had planned, but both of us recognized. Partnership. I returned to my room, to that massive bed, and this time when I closed my eyes, sleep came. Because for the first time in 6 months, I wasn't alone in the dark. Riker woke me before dawn, which I decided was the mark of a tyrant, not a king. Training yard, 5 minutes. He stood in my doorway like a mountain given human form, already dressed in fitted tactical pants, and a compression shirt that did absolutely nothing to hide the predator underneath all lean muscle and coiled violence. Wear something you can move in. I arrived in 7 minutes wearing borrowed clothes that hung loose on my frame, black Lululemon leggings and a Nike sports bra that someone had left folded outside my door with military precision. My feet were bare against cold stone toes curling against the chill. The training yard was carved from the mountainside itself, a 100-foot square of packed earth surrounded by sheer rock walls that climbed 50 feet toward the sky. The sky was still bruised with night stars fading reluctantly into gray. Cold bit at my exposed skin, mountain air sharp enough to hurt. "You're late," Riker said, arms crossed over his chest. "You're insane. It's barely dawn. Normal people are sleeping." Dawn is when guards change shifts and the court sleeps off last night's wine and politics. He moved to the center of the yard, gesturing me forward with economical movement. "It's the only time we won't have an audience watching every move, judging every mistake." I entered the space, hyper-aware of his gaze, tracking my every movement. Like I was prey, he was deciding whether to chase. "Your shadows respond to emotion," he said, beginning to circle me like a hunting wolf, predatory and patient. "Fear, anger, panic. We need to teach you to access them through control instead through choice. And you know how to train a Dark Omega because I spent 5 years learning to control a wolf that wanted to slaughter everyone who looked at me wrong after my family was murdered." His tone was matter-of-fact, but something flickered behind his eyes. Old pain locked away, but never forgotten. Scars that went deeper than skin. My father, mother, and younger sister. Killed in a coordinated attack when I was 18. Left me with a kingdom and a wolf that screamed for blood every waking moment. He stopped circling, faced me directly. Different power, same principle. Control or be controlled. Master it or let it master you. He started with breathing exercises that made me feel ridiculous. Standing still, eyes closed, focusing on my inhale and exhale while he circled me like I was prey. He hadn't decided whether to eat, whether to train, whether to trust. Then grounding techniques. Naming things I could see, hear, smell. Pulling my awareness out of spiraling thoughts and into my body, into the present moment instead of the past that haunted me. "The shadows aren't separate from you," he said, voice coming from behind me now. "They're an extension of your will. Right now, they only come out when your emotions overwhelm your control. We're going to reverse that, make them answer to your command, not your fear. How proponent by pushing you until you learn to stay centered, even when everything in you screams to panic, to fight, to run." He smiled, sharp and dangerous as a blade. "Hit me." I blinked, certain I'd misheard. "What? You heard me? Hit me. Open palm, closed fist. I don't care, just try." I swung half-heartedly, pulling the punch even as I threw it. He caught my wrist before the blow landed, his grip firm but not painful, controlled strength. "Again, like you mean it this time." This time I put force behind it, real intention. He deflected easily with minimal movement, spinning me around until my back pressed against his chest. His arm locked across my shoulders, not tight enough to hurt, but inescapable, demonstrating the massive gulf in our strength. My wolf whimpered at the display of dominance, the reminder that he could break me without effort. The shadows stirred in response, protective and violent. "There." His breath was warm against my ear, voice low and intimate. "Feel that, the way your power rises when you feel trapped, when you feel helpless." I did. They coiled in my chest like smoke, like living darkness, ready to explode outward to protect me the only way they knew how. "Now breathe. Don't push them down. That's suppression, not control. Acknowledge them. Thank them for trying to protect you. Then choose not to use them." It took 3 tries and every ounce of focus I had. But slowly, painfully, the shadows settled back down, accepted my will instead of my fear. Riker released me, and I staggered forward, gasping, like I'd run a mile. "Good, again." We drilled for an hour. He'd grab me, pin me, corner me, never roughly, never cruel, but always decisively. Always triggering that trapped, desperate instinct that made my power flare, that made the darkness rise like a tide. Each time I practiced breathing through it, staying present, choosing control over reaction, will over instinct. By the time the sun cleared the mountain peaks, painting everything in shades of gold and amber, I was drenched in sweat and trembling with exhaustion. But the shadows had stayed contained through the last 5 drills, answering to my command instead of my fear. "Better," Riker said, handing me a water skin. "Tomorrow we'll work on summoning them intentionally, on making them come when you call instead of when you panic." "One, there's more," I groaned, muscles already screaming. "There's always more." He drank from his own water skin, and I tried not to watch the way his throat moved, the way sweat made his skin gleam. Failed spectacularly. Controlling the panic is step 1. Weaponizing the power is step 2. Making you dangerous enough that no one will dare touch you again, that's step 3. We fell into a rhythm over the following days, a routine that became familiar, almost comfortable. Dawn training sessions that left me aching and furious and strangely exhilarated. Riker was a brutal teacher, demanding precise, never satisfied with good enough. always pushing for better. But he was also patient in a way I hadn't expected, adjusting his approach when something didn't work, celebrating small victories with a rare smile that transformed his whole face from stone to something almost human. The physical training came next. Basic combat for an Omega who'd never been allowed to fight back, who'd been taught that resistance only made things worse. Your ex trained you to be helpless, Riker said on day 4, demonstrating a simple defensive stance. Weight balanced, hands up. Trained you to freeze, to accept, to submit. We're going to undo that. We're going to make you dangerous. He taught me how to break holds. Where to strike to disable a larger opponent, throat, solar plexus, knee, groin, eyes. How to use momentum against someone stronger. Redirecting force instead of meeting it head on. We moved through the form slowly at first, his hands adjusting my posture with clinical efficiency, his body demonstrating the movements I needed to mirror. Then he'd attack, not hard, not truly dangerous, but fast enough and real enough that my instincts screamed that my body remembered every time Damien had cornered me. I'd block counter, sometimes successfully. More often, I'd end up on my back with Riker standing over me, breathing hard, offering a hand to pull me up, patient despite my failures. The touches lingered, his hand steadying my hip as he showed me how to pivot, thumb pressing against bone. My palm pressed against his chest as I practiced a strike, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. The slide of his arm around my waist as he demonstrated a throw, his body solid and warm against mine, for 3 heartbeats too long for a moment that stretched. Neither of us mentioned it. On the morning of day 12, I finally managed to flip him, actually flipped the Alpha King onto his back, using his own momentum against him. He stayed down, looking up at me with something new in his eyes, respect maybe, or recognition that I was becoming something other than a victim. You're stronger than you think, he said quietly, voice rough. I had a good teacher. I offered my hand, mirroring what he'd done for me dozens of times. He took it, let me pull him up, though we both knew he could have risen without help. We stood there in the dawn light, close enough that I could see the silver flecks in his winter storm eyes, the old scar along his jaw, the way his lips parted slightly, like he was about to say something that mattered. My father taught me that power was everything, he said instead, voice rough with emotion he rarely showed. That mercy was weakness, that an alpha's job was to dominate or be dominated, to rule through fear and strength. His hand still held mine, warm and calloused. He was murdered for that philosophy, challenged by 3 alphas who thought they could take him together. They were right. A muscle ticked in his jaw, and I inherited a kingdom held together by fear, by violence, by the belief that strength was the only thing that mattered. You're not him, I said, certain of it, despite barely knowing this man. No. His thumb brushed across my knuckles, the gesture almost tender. But I became what I needed to be to survive, to keep this kingdom from tearing itself apart in civil war. And somewhere along the way, I forgot there was any other option besides strength and domination. Why are you telling me this? Because you look at me like I'm a person, not a weapon or a throne or a tool to be used. He released my hand slowly, deliberately, and that's more dangerous than any shadow you could throw at me. The training yard felt too small suddenly, the air too thin, charged with something I didn't want to name. I pulled back before I did something foolish, like closing the distance between us, like asking him what he meant by dangerous. Same time tomorrow, I managed, voice steadier than I felt. Riker nodded, but his gaze tracked me as I retreated like I was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Intense and intent and full of questions neither of us was ready to answer. That afternoon, everything changed. I collapsed. Not from exhaustion, though my body ached in ways I hadn't known were possible. From 12 years of poison, finally demanding payment, the debt coming due all at once. I was serving wine at a council session, still maintaining my orgullo as Emma Harris, nobody's servant, because the fewer people who knew the truth, the better. The crystal glass shattered in my hand without warning. Silver shards embedded themselves in my palm, burning like acid. Blood pooled impossibly red against white marble. The world tilted sideways, my vision narrowed to a tunnel edges going black and grainy. My wolf whimpered, that weak flutter beneath years of suppression, finally guttering out like a candle in a storm. I heard someone shout, felt my knees hit stone hard enough to bruise. Then strong arms caught me before I could crack my skull, open before I could bleed out on expensive marble. Call Dr. Morrison, now! Riker's voice cracked through the council chamber like a whip, like an order that would be obeyed or else. I tried to tell him I was fine, that he should let the guards handle it, that this would ruin everything, would expose me. But darkness swallowed the words before they could form, swallowed everything. I woke to white walls and the smell of antiseptic and something floral, like someone had tried to make a medical facility less terrifying. Medical wing. Private room, judging by the expensive equipment and the fact that I had an actual bed instead of a cot in a hallway with a curtain for privacy. Riker sat in a chair beside me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. He looked like he'd been there for hours, maybe days. Dark circles under his eyes, jaw shadowed with stubble. "Welcome back," he said quietly when my eyes opened. "What happened?" My voice came out like gravel, throat raw. "You collapsed. 12 years of wolf's bane poisoning finally caught up with you." His jaw was tight tendons standing out. "Dr. Morrison says it's a miracle you're alive. That level of sustained poisoning, 3 drops per meal for 12 years, should have killed you years ago. Your body should have shut down." "How long was I out?" 18 hours. My eyes widened. 18 hours. Almost a full day lost to darkness. The council saw the Alphaking carry a bleeding Omega out of their meeting. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Rumors are already spreading like wildfire. Questions being asked. Theories proposed. Panic clawed at my chest with familiar iron fingers. Damien is still here. Summit doesn't end for another week. Riker leaned forward, and for the first time I saw real concern in those winter storm eyes, not just calculation or political maneuvering. "Serafina, we need to talk about what happens next." "I can leave. Disappear before, that's not what I'm suggesting." He reached out slowly, giving me time to retreat, and took my unbandaged hand. "When I carried you out of that chamber, something happened." His thumb moved in soothing sweeps across my palm, gentle despite the strength in those hands. "I scented you. Really scented you without the panic and adrenaline masking everything." His voice dropped lower, intimate in the quiet room. "Rain and wild honeysuckle and ozone. But underneath that, something else. Something that made my wolf recognize you at a level I've never experienced." My breath caught in my throat. "Mate," he said, simply, the word heavy with meaning. Not forced, not artificial. Real. "That's not possible." The bond with Damien was never a true bond, just chains disguised as connection, manipulation, and pain dressed up as love. Riker's grip tightened slightly, reassuring. "I can feel the difference. My wolf knows the difference. This is what a real mate bond feels like." He released my hands, sat back, giving me space to process. "I'm not asking you to accept it, not asking you to act on it, just telling you what I know to be true." His winter storm eyes held mine, honest and direct. "You're my mate, and that changes everything about how I approach this situation, about how much danger you're in." I was discharged 3 days later with strict orders to rest, stay hydrated, avoid stress, and let my body purge the remaining poison from my system over the next 2 weeks. Riker ignored those orders completely. "You're still training," he said when I protested, when I told him the doctor said I needed rest. "Just differently. We don't have time to wait for your body to fully recover." Instead of combat drills, we worked on shadow manipulation. Learning to summon the darkness intentionally instead of waiting for fear to trigger it. Learning to make it answer to my will rather than my trauma. He'd stand 20 feet away in the training yard, patient as stone arms crossed over his chest. "Call them," he'd say, voice calm and steady. "Not because you're scared, not because you're angry, because you choose to." It was harder than any physical training required, a kind of surrender I'd spent years avoiding, acknowledging the power instead of suppressing it, embracing the darkness instead of hiding from it, accepting that this was part of me. But slowly, painfully over days that turned into a week, I learned to pool shadows in my palm like water, like liquid darkness given form. To send tendrils across the space between us, controlled and precise. To shape darkness into shields and weapons and chains to make it do what I wanted instead of what my fear demanded. Riker never flinched, never showed fear even when the darkness wrapped around him, even when I could have hurt him. Just stood there with that slight smile, watching me grow into something I'd been taught to hate, something I'd been told made me a monster. "Beautiful," he murmured one morning when I managed to wrap shadows around a training dummy and lift it 3 feet off the ground, hold it suspended in darkness. "Absolutely beautiful." He wasn't looking at the shadows. He was looking at me. The formal council dinner happened on day 17, 2 weeks since the kiss that changed everything. 2 weeks of training and healing and trying not to think about the mate bond humming between Riker and me like a live wire, like something alive and electric. Lyra appeared in my room that afternoon with a dress that probably cost more than I'd earned in my entire life. "You're not a servant tonight," she said, laying the midnight blue gown across my bed with careful hands. "You're the Alphaking's, whatever you are. Act like it, own it." The dress fit perfectly, like it had been made for me. Hugged curves I'd forgotten I had made my skin look less like paper and more like porcelain. Silver embroidery caught the light like starfall, like constellations mapped across fabric. Someone, probably Lyra with her efficiency, had arranged for my hair to be done. They left the brown dye but styled it into an intricate braid wrapped with silver wire that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the motel. The brown contacts stayed in hiding violet that would have given me away. But when I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. I looked like someone important, someone powerful, someone who might actually belong at the Alpha King's side instead of cowering at the edges. Riker met me at my door, dressed in black formal wear, with that golden armor polished to a mirror shine, looking every inch the king. His eyes widened slightly when he saw me, something flashing across his face too quickly to read. "You look," he stopped, seemed to reconsider whatever he was about to say. "Ready. Not beautiful, not stunning. Ready. Like I was walking into battle, not a dinner. Maybe I was." The great hall had been transformed since I'd last seen it. Long tables arranged in a U-shaped position so every alpha could see the dais, could see where Riker's throne sat. And where a second throne, slightly smaller, but still magnificent, still powerful, had been placed beside it. For me, my stomach dropped like a stone. "Breathe," Riker murmured as we entered, his hand at the small of my back, reassuring and warm. "You've got this. You're stronger than they know." Every head turned, dozens of alphas, their high-ranking pack members, advisors, warriors, all watching as I walked beside the Alpha King to take a seat that proclaimed I belonged there, that said I was important, that I mattered. The weight of their gazes felt physical, pressing against my skin like hands. Testing, measuring, judging. Riker remained standing, his voice carrying effortlessly through the hall with the authority of someone born to command. "You've all heard rumors, speculation about the Omega at my side." He paused, letting the silence build like pressure. "Let me make the truth clear." His hand found mine on the armrest between our thrones, warm and strong. "Seraphina is under my protection. Any who wish to challenge that are welcome to face me directly." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. No one was stupid enough to take that challenge, not openly. But I could see the calculation in their eyes. Political maneuvering took subtler forms than direct challenges. The dinner began with strange civility, with carefully neutral conversations. I picked at food I couldn't taste, probably expensive, probably delicious, probably wasted on my anxiety. Hyper-aware of every whisper, every sidelong glance, every assessment. Beside me, Riker appeared relaxed, almost bored, but I could feel the tension coiled in him through the mate bond, ready to strike like a coiled rattlesnake. It was Alpha Darius who finally made his move, who couldn't resist testing the new power dynamic. He rose from his seat 3 tables down, his voice booming with false friendliness. "Forgive my curiosity, Alpha King, but many of us are concerned. 50 years old, built like a brawler, with the kind of arrogance that came from never being challenged, from always winning. An Omega wielding shadow magic," Darius continued, voice carrying. "It's been centuries since such bloodlines walked among us. How can we be certain she's not a threat to our pack's stability, to our safety?" Riker's expression didn't change, but I felt his wolf rise beneath his skin. "Are you questioning my judgment, Darius?" "Of course not. I simply think—" Darius smiled, showing too many teeth like a predator. "Perhaps a small demonstration would ease concerns, so we can all see that the little Omega has her power well in hand." It was a trap, and we both knew it. Refuse and I looked like I was hiding something dangerous, something uncontrollable. Accept and give them a target to pick apart, to analyze, to find weaknesses in. I stood before Riker could respond, before he could make this about him instead of me. "You want to see control?" My voice came out steadier than I felt stronger. "Or are you hoping to see me fail? Hoping to prove I'm the monster you want me to be?" Darius's smile widened, predatory and pleased. "I'm sure you're perfectly safe, dear. Though I confess I've never understood how an Omega could hope to withstand an Alpha's will and Alpha's dominance." He let his power roll out, a wave of dominance, meant to force submission, to make me lower my eyes and bare my throat, to make me kneel like every Omega should, to make me prove I was less than him. My wolf snarled, 12 years of suppression ending in a surge of defiance. The shadows rose in response, eager and violent. But this time I didn't panic. I breathed through it just like Riker taught me. Acknowledged the power coiling in my chest. Thanked it for wanting to protect me. And then made a choice. The shadows poured out in a controlled stream, not a chaotic explosion. They formed a visible barrier around me, shimmering like black smoke, given substance, beautiful and terrible, deflecting Darius's dominance like water off stone. Then I pushed back, let the shadows do what they wanted, what I wanted. The shadows reached across the hall, wrapping around Darius's ankles, his knees, his chest. Not violent, not crushing, not hurting, just present. A reminder that his power didn't touch me unless I allowed it. You wanted to see control, I said quietly. The hall had gone so silent that everyone heard that my words carried like thunder. This is what it looks like. Darius tried to fight it, pride demanding resistance. His wolf-surged eyes flashing amber power crackling around him like static electricity, like lightning looking for ground. The shadows didn't budge, didn't waver. Slowly, inexorably, they pulled him down. First to one knee, then both, until the alpha who'd challenged me knelt before my throne with my darkness wrapped around him like chains, like judgment. Enough, Riker said, pride evident in his voice and the slightest smile I could hear even without looking. I released Darius immediately. The shadows flowed back to me like obedient servants, settling under my skin as easily as breathing. The alpha climbed to his feet, face flushed with humiliation and shock, and something that might have been respect. Anyone else have concerns about Omega's stability? Riker asked mildly, voice carrying a dare. Silence. I sat down, my hands trembling in my lap where no one could see adrenaline crashing through me. I'd done it, controlled the power, wielded it with precision instead of panic. Proven I was more than a victim or a weapon waiting to explode, proven I was dangerous by choice. Riker's hand found mine under the table, fingers lacing through mine, in a gesture hidden from view just for us. He squeezed once, gentle and warm and full of pride. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of careful conversation and stolen glances. Alphas approached to offer formal greetings, their eyes now holding respect instead of just calculation and fear. A few even seemed genuinely impressed, like I'd passed some tests they'd set. It wasn't until later, when we'd retreated to the privacy of the quarter outside my chambers, away from watching eyes, that Riker finally spoke what I'd seen building in his eyes all evening. "You terrify me," he said quietly, voice raw with honesty. I froze, hand on my door. "What?" "In the best possible way." He turned to face me fully, and the raw honesty in his expression made my breath catch, made my heart stutter. "I've spent my entire reign making sure I was the strongest piece on the board. The one no one could challenge or manipulate or use, the one who controlled everything." He moved nearer, not touching, but near enough that I could feel his warmth. "And then you walk into my hall, ask me to kiss you, and turn my entire world upside down in one desperate moment. Riker, you're not my weakness, Serafina. You're my equal, maybe my better." He laughed, the sound rough and wondering, almost disbelieving. "And that terrifies me because I'm realizing I don't want to rule alone anymore. I don't want to be alone anymore." He shortened the space between us, close enough that I could feel his heat bleeding through the air. "I want to rule with you, not as a pretty symbol or a political move, but as a true partner, someone who challenges me, someone who makes me better." My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to escape. "You barely know me. I know you survived hell and came out stronger. I know you saved lives instead of taking them when you could do either. I know that when you look at me, you see Riker, not just the Alpha King or the throne or the power." He stopped just short of touching me, respecting boundaries even now. "I know that every day I spend training beside you, talking with you, watching you grow into your power every day, I'm more certain that you're exactly who I've been waiting for without knowing it. This bond between us," I whispered, needing to know, needing to understand. "Is it real or just proximity and prophecy and political convenience, just biology forcing us together?" "I don't know," he admitted, and somehow that honesty meant more than false certainty. "But I want to find out, with you, if you'll let me." I thought of Damien, of forced bonds and stolen choices of years where my wants and needs meant nothing. Then I thought of Riker's patient teaching, his protection without possession, the way he'd promised I was safe and then kept that promise even when it cost him politically, even when it painted a target on his back. "Ask me again," I said, the words feeling right even though they scared me. "In a month, when this isn't all so new and terrifying. When I've had time to think without fear clouding everything." Riker nodded slowly, acceptance and disappointment warring in his expression, both visible and raw. "A month, I can do that, I can wait." He left me at my door with space between us, but this time that space felt less like distance and more like anticipation, like possibility instead of fear. The next morning I found an envelope on my breakfast tray. Inside, legal documents. A new identity, Sarah Mitchell. Bank account details showing $300,000. Property deed for a cottage in Cannon Beach, Oregon, White clapboard ocean views, 3 bedrooms far from Montana and politics, and everything complicated. Everything I'd need to disappear completely to build a safe life. My hands shook as I read through the carefully prepared paperwork. Riker entered my room without knocking like he'd known I'd be reading it. "You read it?" he asked, voice carefully neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm reading it now." He moved to the window, stared out at the mountains with his back to me. "Oregon coast is beautiful. Maya would like it there. Fresh start. Safe. Quiet. No one would ever find you." My chest tightened painfully. "You want me to leave?" "I want you to have choices." He turned to face me, and the raw honesty in his expression stole my breath. "Real choices. Not just accepting protection because you're afraid of the alternative, because staying seems safer than running. And if I choose to stay, then you stay because you want to. Because this," he gestured between us, the space that felt charged with possibility, "matters enough to fight for. Not because you're trapped. Not because you have nowhere else to go." I looked at the documents in my hands. Freedom. Safety. Everything I dreamed of 6 months ago when I was cleaning casino floors and sleeping in cheap motels. Then I looked at Riker. At the man who'd trained me, protected me, given me power instead of taking it away. Who offered me escape, even though I could see in his eyes that he wanted me to stay. I walked to the fireplace and dropped the papers into the flames. "I choose to stay," I said, watching the edges curl and blacken, watching my escape route turn to ash. "I choose you, I choose this. Not because I'm trapped, because I want to." The smile that transformed his face was worth every risk, every danger, every uncertainty ahead. "Good," he said simply, voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "Because I wasn't ready to let you go. I don't think I could have." "You would have," I said, certain of it. "That's what makes you different. You'd have let me walk away even if it killed you." "Probably," he admitted, "but I'm glad I don't have to find out." He closed the distance between us, then slowly enough that I could retreat if I wanted. I didn't want to. His hand cupped my face thumb, brushing my cheekbone with that gentleness that still surprised me. "Thank you." "For what?" "For choosing this, for choosing us, for being brave enough to stay when running would be easier." "Running is never easier," I said. "I should know. I've been doing it for 6 months." He smiled, and for once it reached his eyes, transformed his whole face into something warm and hopeful and human. "No more running," he promised. "No more running," I agreed. The message arrived the next day, shattering our fragile peace like glass thrown against stone. A rogue wolf collapsed at the fortress gates with claw marks across his chest and terror in his eyes. He died before Morrison could reach him, before anyone could save him or get answers bleeding out on ancient stones. But he'd carried an envelope, cream-colored paper, expensive stationery, completely at odds with the crimson stains soaking through it with the violence that had delivered it. Lyra brought it to the war room where Riker and I were reviewing Border Patrol reports, trying to maintain some normalcy. She set the blood-stained envelope on the table without a word, her expression grim as death. My hands shook as I opened it, knowing what I'd find. Inside, 2 things. A letter in Damien's elegant handwriting, the script I'd once thought was beautiful, and a small wooden box that smelled of blood and silver. I read the letter first, each word a knife. "Serafina, I have your sister. You remember Maya, don't you? Sweet little thing, only 17. She screams so beautifully when she's frightened. Reminds me of you in the beginning before you learned to be quiet. Come to Black Ridge, Bunker Glacier National Park. Blood Moon Night, 3 days from now. Come alone, or I send her back to you in pieces. One finger at a time. I'll start with the important ones, the ones she uses to text her friends to do her homework, to live her little life. Already took her left pinky. Enclosed as proof of my commitment. We have unfinished business, you and I. Time you remembered where you belong. Time you came home. Your mate, Damien." The letter fell from my numb fingers, fluttering to the table like a dead leaf. I opened the box with hands that didn't feel like mine. Maya's severed pinky finger lay on white silk, the silver ring I'd given her for her 16th birthday still wrapped around it, still gleaming despite the blood. The world tilted sideways. Shadows exploded from my core, uncontrolled rage and terror and guilt, all tangled together in a storm of darkness. They lashed against the walls, cracking stone, making torches flicker, wildly making the entire room shake. I heard Riker shouting my name from very far away, felt his hands on my shoulders trying to anchor me. But all I could see was Maya, my baby sister. 17 years old and terrified, held hostage because I'd been stupid enough to think I could escape, selfish enough to leave her behind, because I'd left her behind when I ran. "Serafina, Breathe, right now. Riker's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. I forced my eyes to his, to those winter storm eyes that had become my anchor. Steady and unyielding, an anchor in the hurricane. We'll get her back, he said, each word deliberate and absolute avowal. I swear it on my life, on my crown, on everything I am. He wants me to come alone. Absolutely not, Riker's voice went hard as iron, as unbreakable. It's a trap, an obvious one. He's counting on you being emotional, being reckless. I know it's a trap. The words came out as a snarl, my wolf rising beneath my skin. But he has my sister. If I don't go, then we bring an army, 50 warriors, 100. We raise his pack to the ground and take her by force. We make him regret ever touching her. Kieran entered, then followed by Lyra Thorne and Mira. The seer looked more troubled than usual, her white eyes distant and afraid. The Black Ridge bunker, Mira said without preamble, voice shaking. Old magic sleeps there. Very old, very dangerous. The kind that should never wake. Lyra was already pulling maps, spreading them across the table with efficient movements. Here, abandoned Cold War facility in Glacier National Park. 80 feet underground, reinforced concrete and steel. Abandoned 60 years ago after... She stopped, eyes widening as she read something in her notes. After what? Riker demanded, voice sharp. After the Dark Omega Purge, Lyra said quietly, like speaking it softly would make it less terrible. Stories say the last Omega Queen died there, that she cursed the ground with her final breath, cursed it to recognize Dark Omega blood. Ice slid down my spine like winter given form. What kind of curse? The kind that responds to shadow magic. Mira said, her gnarled finger tracing the air above the map, like she could feel the power even from here. If you go there with your power unchecked, especially during a blood moon, when the veil between worlds is thin, you could wake something that should stay sleeping, something that killed hundreds before. And if we bring an army, Riker demanded, strategic mind already calculating. The clash of so much aggression, so much alpha dominance near that much dark magic. Mira shook her head, white eyes seeing things we couldn't. It would be like throwing a torch into a powder keg. The bunker could consume everyone within 5 miles, maybe more. So what do we do? Thorne growled, frustration evident. Let him keep the girl. Let him win. No. I straightened, decision crystallizing with the clarity that came from having no good options, from being backed into a corner. I go, like he asked, but not alone. Riker's eyes narrowed dangerously. Explain. He wants me alone because he thinks I'm still the terrified Omega who ran from him 6 months ago. He doesn't know about the training, about the control I've learned, about what I've become. I looked at Riker, willing him to understand. I go to the bunker. You follow at a distance with a small team. Kieran Thorne, maybe 2 others, close enough to help if needed, far enough that the magic doesn't react to an army's presence. And you face him alone in the meantime. Riker said flatly, voice like stone, while he has your sister as leverage, while he has every advantage. I face him long enough to get Maya clear. Then you come in. Then we end this. I don't like it. I don't care. The words came out sharper than intended, but I meant them. She's my sister, my responsibility, my fault she's in this position. And I'm not the helpless Omega he remembers. I'm not that person anymore. Riker studied me for a long moment, winter storm eyes searching mine. I could see the war in his expression, the king who wanted to solve problems with overwhelming force versus the man who'd promised I was safe, who'd sworn no one would control me, who'd given me choices. Not alone, he finally said, voice carrying that tone that moved armies, that made Alphas bow. We walk in together, face to face, united front. Riker, not alone. His hand found mine across the table, grip firm. We do this together, or I send every warrior I have, and damn the consequences. Damn the curse, damn everything. You're not facing him without me. Mira made a small sound of approval, almost satisfaction. 2 bonded wolves. Powers balance, shadow and strength, Omega and Alpha. The old magic might accept that, might even recognize it as harmony instead of threat. We're not bonded, I said, needing to be clear, needing him to understand. Aren't you? The seer's smile was knowing, ancient, like she saw things we were still blind to. The formal bite doesn't make the bond, child. It only acknowledges what's already there, what's already formed. And you two, you're already bound. Anyone with eyes can see it. Heat flooded my cheeks despite the circumstances. Riker's thumb brushed reassuring lines across my hand. 3 days until the blood moon. That gives us time to scout the approach, plan extraction routes, prepare for complications, for everything that could go wrong. Lyra nodded, always practical, already making lists. I'll coordinate logistics. Kieran and Thorne began discussing tactical positions, sight lines, emergency protocols, extraction vehicles. I stared at Maya's severed finger in its white silk box and made a promise, a vow written in blood and shadow. 3 days. In 3 days, Damien Frost would learn exactly what happened when you took something from a dark Omega who'd finally learned to fight back. When you pushed someone too far and they stopped running. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and dread, time moving too fast and too slow simultaneously. Riker insisted on additional training sessions teaching me to fight while protecting someone else, drilling scenarios where I'd need to shield Maya while defending against attack where I'd have to be defense and offense simultaneously. We practiced in silence, our movements synchronized from weeks of working together until Kieran commented that we fought like we shared a mind, like we'd been partners for years instead of weeks. Maybe we did share something. The mate bond hummed between us constantly now, a live wire of awareness that made me know exactly where Riker was at any given moment, that told me when his mood shifted from calm to tense, when he was worried, when he was planning, when he was thinking about the blood moon, and all the ways this could go catastrophically wrong. I felt it all through that invisible tether, and it terrified me how much I'd come to depend on that connection, how much I needed it. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. Couldn't even pretend to try. I found Riker on the ramparts staring out at mountains silvered by moonlight. Tomorrow night, that moon would rise blood red. Tomorrow night, everything would change one way or another. You should be resting, he said without turning, somehow knowing it was me. So should you. He smiled slightly, barely visible in profile. Touché. I joined him at the wall, our shoulders nearly touching, drawn together by gravity or fate, or something deeper. The fortress sprawled below us, lights glittering in the darkness. Thousands of wolves sleeping peacefully, trusting their Alpha King to keep them safe to make the right decisions. Thank you, I said quietly, words inadequate but necessary, for not making me choose between saving her and staying safe, for not making this about control. I learned something these past weeks. Riker turned to face me, moonlight catching the silver flecks in his winter storm eyes, making them glow. Safety isn't the same as a cage. Your ex wanted to lock you away and call it protection, wanted to make you small and manageable. I refuse to make the same mistake, even if it means walking into a trap, even if it means risking everything. His hand lifted, hesitated, then cupped my cheek with a gentleness that didn't match the violence coiled in his frame. The alpha strength barely leashed. Especially then. You asked me to wait a month before asking again, I whispered, heart hammering. It's been 3 weeks. I'm not asking. Not yet. His thumb swept gentle arcs along my cheekbone, touch reverent. I just want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, whether we face him together or it all goes sideways, whether we succeed or fail, I don't regret any of this. He paused, choosing words carefully, weighing each one. You've made me better, made me want to be better, made me remember that there's more to ruling than fear and strength. And regardless of what happens tomorrow, that's a gift I'll carry forever. We're going to survive tomorrow, I said fiercely, believing it with everything in me, because I had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. Both of us and Maya. We're going to walk out of those ruins, and you're going to have your full month to court me properly before I give you an answer. You're going to get that chance. Riker's laugh was soft and genuine, warming something cold inside me. Court you properly, I like the sound of that. I like imagining that future. Good, because I have very high standards. I tried to smile, tried to be brave. I'd expect nothing less. He sobered, his hand sliding from my cheek to curl around the back of my neck, pulling me closer until our foreheads touched, until we shared breath. Promise me something, he said, voice low and urgent. If it comes down to a choice between saving your sister and saving yourself, you choose both. You don't sacrifice yourself to save her. We find another way. We always find another way. Riker, promise me, Serafina. I looked into his eyes and saw the fear there, the vulnerability he usually kept locked away behind stone and strategy. Saw how much this mattered to him, how much I mattered. I promise, I whispered against his lips, sealing it. We both come home. All 3 of us. He nodded, satisfied, believing me because he had to. We stood together on the ramparts until dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold, watching the last peaceful sunrise before we'd walk into a bunker, where old magic slept and my ex waited with my sister as bait into darkness and danger and destiny. The blood moon was rising. And I was done running. Black Ridge Bunker rose from the earth like a broken promise, like something that should have stayed buried. Rusted steel doors thrust from rocky ground at the base of a cliff face. Warning signs faded by 60 years of weather and neglect, authorized personnel only. Restricted area, no trespassing. Government warnings from a government that no longer cared. The air tasted of copper and old magic thick enough to choke on, heavy enough to feel. My wolf paced restlessly beneath my skin, caught between the instinct to flee and the desperate need to find Maya to save her. The blood moon hung low on the horizon, not yet fully risen, but already staining the sky crimson, turning everything the color of violence. Riker's hand found mine squeezed once, strong and warm and steady. Remember the plan. I nodded, throat too tight for words, adrenaline singing through my veins. Kieran's voice crackled through the earpiece hidden beneath my hair, invisible and vital. In position, 500 yards out, elevated, clear shot on the entrance. Wind from the northwest, 2 miles per hour. Ready when you are. Thorn's rumble followed, steady as bedrock. Perimeter secure. No movement except you two. No reinforcements, no escape routes I can see. Damien's inside, Lara added from the mobile command center, a mile back, monitoring everything. Heat signatures show at least 6 hostiles in the main chamber. One smaller signature, probably Maya. Heat patterns suggest she's alive, but not moving much. Riker's jaw tightened, muscle ticking. Rules of engagement. You give the signal, we breach, Kieran said, voice flat and professional. Extraction protocol Alpha. Maya first, you two second, everything else is scorched earth. No survivors on their side if it comes to that. Copy that. Riker released my hand, but the mate bond kept us connected, kept me tethered to him. I could feel his determination bleeding through the connection, his fear for me, his absolute conviction that we'd walk out of this together, that we'd succeed. I drew strength from it, from him, from us. We descended concrete stairs into darkness, into the earth itself. Emergency lights flickered to life as we moved deeper, motion sensors, still working after 60 years, testing everything in sickly red that reminded me of the blood moon of violence, of endings. The stairwell stretched down 80 feet each step, taking us further from safety and closer to the magic I could feel thrumming through the walls like a heartbeat. Ancient, hungry, waiting for something, for someone, waiting for me. The main chamber opened before us, 60 feet square, 20-foot ceiling, bare concrete stained with rust, and something darker, something that looked like dried blood in patterns that might have been deliberate, might have been ritual. The air was thick with old blood and older rage, with the echo of screams long silent. Damien waited in the center, looking like he'd stepped out of a boardroom instead of a condemned military installation. $5,000 suit, perfectly groomed, that cold smile I knew too well, had nightmares about. Maya knelt at his feet. My baby sister, 17 years old, blonde hair matted with blood and sweat, left hand bandaged where her pinky used to be. Silver chains wrapped around her wrists, glowing with sickly green runes that made my shadows recoil instinctively, that burned my eyes to look at. When she saw me, she tried to scream through the wow. Eyes wild with terror and relief and desperation all mixed together. Right on time, Damien said, his voice echoing off concrete walls, confident and cruel. And you brought the king. How predictable. How utterly expected. Let her go. My voice was steadier than I felt, stronger than I'd ever been. This is between us. It always has been. Oh, but it's so much more than that now, isn't it? Damien circled Maya slowly, one hand trailing across her shoulder in a gesture that made my shadows snarl beneath my skin, made violence rise in my throat. You were supposed to be mine. My Omega. My weapon. My perfect tool. His eyes found Riker, lip curling with contempt. Instead, you whored yourself to the Alphaking and became his pet monster. His trained attack dog. Riker's growl rumbled through the chamber like distant thunder, like a promise of violence. Choose your next words carefully, Frost. Very carefully. Or what, you'll kill me. Damien laughed, the sound echoing, bouncing off walls. Look around, Alphaking. This place remembers what your ancestors did. How they slaughtered every dark Omega they could find because they feared what they couldn't control, couldn't own. He gestured at the stained walls with his free hand, theatrical. The stones are soaked in their blood, their power, their rage, and tonight under the blood moon, that power wakes, that rage remembers, and it will answer to me. I felt it, then felt what he meant, the hum beneath my feet, ancient and hungry. Magic that recognized the shadows in my blood and reached for them like a drowning man reaching for air, desperate and vocal. And the blood moon amplifies everything, Damien continued conversationally, like we were discussing weather instead of life and death. Old magic, new bonds, Rituals that should have died centuries ago. It's all stronger tonight. All possible. He yanked Maya's head back, exposing her throat pale and vulnerable. A ceremonial blade appeared in his other hand, silver etched with runes that made my wolf whimper, that smelled of old blood and older magic. Your power for her life. That's the trade. That's the deal. Don't do it, Maya managed around the gag, the words muffled but desperate pleading. The ritual will transfer your shadows to me, Damien explained with the patience of a teacher, like he'd explained this before practiced it. I'll finally have the weapon I always knew you could be. Your sister lives. Everyone wins. Except Serafina, Riker snarled, muscles coiling to attack to defend. She should have thought of that before she ran. Damien's expression hardened, all pretense of civility dropping away. Before she destroyed my office. Before she scarred me. He touched the mark on his jaw, the one I'd given him. Last chance, love. Your power, or I cut her throat and let this hungry ground drink her blood. Let the magic feed on an innocent. Choose. Now. The magic beneath us pulsed eager and patient and hungry. I felt it pulling at my shadows, felt the old curse Mira had warned about stirring awake, stretching like something that had slept too long. If I unleashed my power here without control, without direction, it would feed the bunker's hunger and consume everything within miles. Everyone I loved, everything that mattered. But if I held back, Maya died. My sister died. No choice at all. Riker shifted beside me, every line of his body screaming readiness to fight, to kill, to protect. I put a hand on his arm, stopping him, asking him to trust me one more time. I'll do it, I said, voice steady despite the fear, despite everything. Serafina, no. Trust me. I met his eyes, trying to convey everything I couldn't say aloud, everything I felt, everything I planned. I know what I'm doing. I promise I know. I moved forward, away from Riker, toward Damien and my sister. The chains around Maya's wrists glowed brighter as I approached, responding to my presence, feeding on my power. Damien smiled in triumph and victory he'd already claimed. Smart girl. Kneel. I knelt on the ancient stones, feeling the magic rise around me, like cold water, like drowning. Runes carved into the concrete floor began to glow, forming a circle that enclosed Damien, Maya, and me, sealing us together. The ritual space. Now, Damien said, eyes gleaming with anticipation, with hunger, with the promise of power. Release your power, feed it into the circle. Let it flow. The stones will do the rest. I closed my eyes and reached for the shadows that lived in my blood, that had always lived there. But instead of suppressing them, controlling them, keeping them small and manageable like Riker had taught me, I let them rise. All of them. Every ounce of darkness I'd spent years hiding. Every shadow I'd been taught to fear. Every bit of power that Damien had tried to claim and chain and weaponize. They poured out of me like a flood breaking through a dam, like storm clouds, finally releasing their burden, like 12 years of suppression, ending in a single catastrophic release. Damien laughed in exultation as the shadows filled the ritual circle, exactly as he'd planned, exactly as he'd expected. The runes flared brighter, beginning the transfer that would rip my power from me and give it to him, make him unstoppable. But he'd made one critical mistake, one miscalculation that would cost him everything. He thought I didn't know how to direct them, thought I was still that terrified Omega from 6 months ago. The shadows obeyed my will now. Not my panic, not my fear, not the desperate instinctive reactions of a victim trying to survive. They answered to me. To the woman who'd spent 3 weeks learning control, who'd faced down alphas and prophecies in the darkness inside herself and won. I'd spent weeks learning to ride the power instead of drowning in it. So when they rose, they didn't feed blindly into his ritual. They answered my call. I opened my eyes and smiled. You wanted my power, Damien. Here it is, all of it. The shadows exploded outward with the force of a detonation, shattering the ritual circle in a pulse of dark energy that sent Damien flying backward 20 feet. He hit the wall with a crack that might have been concrete or ribs or spine. I didn't care if he lived or died in that moment. The chains around Maya's wrist fractured like glass green light, dying as the runes lost their power, their hold. I grabbed her, pulled her behind me as the shadows formed a protective barrier. A wall of living darkness that separated us from Damien and everything else in that cursed bunker, kept us safe. Now! Riker's voice rang out, the command echoing off stone like thunder. Kieran and Thorne burst through the entrance, tactical rifles raised ready for war. But Damien wasn't alone. Shapes poured from the bunker's darker corners, creatures of shadow and bone that shouldn't exist, that violated every natural law. Twisted wolves with eyes glowing sickly green, their bodies wrong in ways that made my mind recoil, made reality itself seem questionable. Half-dead things animated by dark magic and Damien's experiments by years of twisted research. The battle erupted in chaos and violence and blood. Riker shifted mid-stride, his human form exploding into a massive black wolf with storm-gray eyes and fangs like daggers, beautiful and terrible. He tore through the creatures with brutal efficiency, every movement precise and lethal alpha power given physical form. Thorn's shotgun boomed silver rounds that turned twisted flesh to ash and screaming. Kieran moved like a ghost, made solid twin combat knives, flashing as he carved through anything stupid enough to get close anything that threatened his king. I held Maya against me, shadows whipping around us in a defensive perimeter that nothing could penetrate, that burned anything that tried. "I've got you," I whispered to her, to my sister. "You're safe now. I swear you're safe." Damien climbed to his feet, fury twisting his features into something monstrous, inhuman. Blood ran from his nose, his expensive suit torn and ruined, covered in concrete dust. "You think you've won?" He thrust his hands toward the ground, trying to seize control of the ancient curse, to turn it against us, to make the magic his. "This place is mine. The old magic answers to me, to my blood." The bunker shuddered like something alive. Cracks spread through concrete like spiderwebs, like the whole structure might collapse. That hungry magic surged upward, ready to consume everything in reach, ready to feed. But it had already tasted my shadows, already recognized the dark Omega blood in my veins, already chosen its mistress. The curse of the last Omega Queen who died here, her rage, her pain, her power. 300 years of fury, it all flowed into me like coming home, like recognition, like finding something I'd lost. Not consuming me, but joining with me. Shadow recognizing shadow across centuries of separation. I understood in that crystalline moment what Mira's prophecy had meant. Not that I would become the cursed queen, but that I would finish what she'd started. Complete her work. Give her peace. "The old magic doesn't answer to you," I said, my voice layered with something ancient and vast, with power that predated nations. "It never did. It was waiting for me." I unleashed everything. My shadows merged with the bunker's curse, transforming from defensive barrier into an unstoppable force. They wrapped around Damien, binding him in chains of pure darkness that fed on his struggle, that grew stronger with his resistance. He screamed, trying to break free, pouring his alpha dominance into the effort, every ounce of power he possessed. The shadows squeezed tighter, unforgiving. "You wanted to claim me," I said, walking toward him slowly while the battle raged around us, while good fought evil in concrete and blood. "To own me, control me, make me your weapon, your thing." The shadows lifted him off the ground, suspended in midair by darkness, given terrible purpose, given will and judgment. I felt the toxic bond he'd forced on me years ago. That last thread of connection that had let him find me, track me, hunt me across 6 months in 3 states, that had let him hurt Maya to hurt me. "I break your claim." My voice rang with finality, with absolute certainty. "I sever your bond. You have no power over me. You never will again." The bond snapped like a cord pulled too tight. I felt it tear free, like ripping off dead skin, like cutting away infected flesh, like lancing a wound that had festered for years. The psychic scream that followed his wolf's anguish at losing what it had claimed, what it thought was rightfully his, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. Damien's scream turned from rage to agony, from confidence to desperation. Riker appeared at my side in human form again, tactical knife in hand, eyes still wolf gold and feral. "Your move, Serafina. Your choice. Your justice." I could have killed Damien then. The shadows would have done it, gladly crushed him like an insect, torn him apart piece by piece, fed him to the hungry curse until nothing remained but screaming and blood. It would have been justified, would have been satisfying, would have been exactly what he deserved for Maya's finger and my 12 years of poison and the 2 years of hell, disguised as love for every moment of pain and fear. But that would make me what he'd always claimed, a monster who destroyed everything she touched. "Live," I said instead, and the shadows dropped him like discarded trash. He collapsed to the concrete, broken and powerless, and gasping like a fish drowning in air. "Live knowing you lost, that the Omega you tried to break became a queen, that every day you draw breath is because I chose mercy over vengeance, because I'm better than you ever could be." I crouched beside him, made sure he could see my eyes, made sure he understood. "And if you ever come near me or mine again, I won't be so merciful." That's not a threat. That's a promise written in blood and shadow. I stood, turned to Riker. "Kieran." Kieran was there instantly, professional and efficient. "Ma'am, take him to the cells. Maximum security. He stands trial before the full council in 1 week." "Trial for what charges?" Damien managed through broken teeth and blood, still defiant, even in defeat, still trying to win something. Kidnapping, assault, forced bonding, attempted murder. I counted them off on my fingers, voice steady despite the rage burning in my chest. And when they find you guilty, and they will, you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell so deep underground, you'll forget what sunlight looks like. You'll regret showing me mercy. Damien spat blood on the concrete, the gesture weak and pathetic. No, I said softly, shadows coiling one last time around my hands in warning and promise. You'll regret that I did. Because death would have been kinder than what's coming. You'll have decades to think about how you lost everything to the Omega you thought was weak. Kieran and Thorne dragged him away, his screams echoing off ancient concrete until distance swallowed them, until silence returned. As the shadows retreated, the twisted creatures Damien had summoned dissolved into nothing, into ash and screaming. The curse, satisfied or simply acknowledged, settled back into the stones, quiet at last after 300 years. The bunker grew quiet except for heavy breathing and the drip of water somewhere in the darkness, the aftermath of battle. I turned to find Maya folding into my arms, sobbing against my shoulder, whole and alive and safe. I've got you, I whispered, holding her tight, holding her like I should have held her before, should have protected her better. You're safe now. I promise you're safe. I won't let anyone hurt you ever again. Riker's hand found the small of my back, steady and warm and proud. As the blood moon reached its zenith outside, bathing the bunker entrance in crimson light like a blessing or a curse, I stood with my sister in my arms, my mate at my back, and shadows that finally truly belonged to me. I was no longer the terrified Omega begging for rescue. I was the dark Omega who'd saved herself, who'd saved everyone. The fortress was in chaos when we returned at dawn, when we drove through the gates with Maya sleeping in the back seat, exhausted and traumatized but alive. Word of what happened at Blackridge had spread faster than wildfire, exaggerated, with each retelling, until I'd apparently single-handedly destroyed an army of shadow demons and resurrected the dead Omega Queen herself, until the story bore almost no resemblance to reality. Maya was safely tucked in medical under Dr. Morrison's care, physically unharmed except for the missing finger, but emotionally shattered nightmares waiting. I'd stayed with her until she finally fell asleep, until the sedatives took hold, then made my way to the war room where Riker's council had assembled, without being summoned, demanding answers. The shouting reached me before I opened the door. Unprecedented display of uncontrolled power. She saved the Alpha King's life, saved an innocent girl. She merged with a curse that killed hundreds. Who's to say she won't turn that power against us when it suits her? I pushed the door open. The room fell silent like I'd cast a spell. A dozen alphas I recognized from the formal dinner turned to stare at me. Their expressions ranged from awe to naked fear, from respect to calculation. Riker stood at the head of the table, still in his blood-worn tactical gear, still carrying the scent of battle. His eyes found mine, and something in my chest loosened at the steady calm I found there, at the absolute faith. Serafina, he said, we were just discussing my execution, I assume. I interrupted, moving into the room with my chin high and shadows coiling beneath my skin, controlled, calm, ready. Or at least my imprisonment, my containment, making me someone else's problem. Alpha Darius, who I'd forced to his knees weeks ago, had the grace to look uncomfortable. Not execution, containment, for everyone's safety. You're too dangerous to be left unchecked, unmonitored. She absorbed the curse of a dead queen. Another alpha added, his voice shaking slightly with fear or awe. Ancient magic that was supposed to stay buried. How do we know she won't turn that power against us? How do we know we're safe? I freed it, I corrected, voice steady and certain. The magic that had been trapped in those ruins for 300 years, hungry and angry, and twisted by centuries of isolation, by abandonment. I gave it purpose, direction, release, then I let it go. I looked around the table, meeting each alpha's eyes in turn, refusing to be cowed. The Blackridge bunker is quiet now. The curse is broken. 300 years of rage finally put to rest. You're welcome for that, for freeing you from a threat you didn't even know existed. That doesn't change what you are, Darius insisted, stubborn to the end. Dark Omegas were purged for a reason 300 years ago. They were too dangerous. Because alphas feared losing control. Riker's voice cut through the room like a blade through silk, sharp and final. Because wolves with power they couldn't dominate or possess threatened the hierarchy they'd built, threatened their sense of superiority. He paused, letting that sink in, letting the accusation hang. My ancestors slaughtered innocents out of fear and called it justice. I won't repeat their mistakes. I refuse to be that person, that king. So what do you propose? Another Alpha demanded, voice sharp with challenge. That we simply accept a dark Omega in your court, in your bed, as your equal. The crude implication made my wolf snarl, but Riker's expression went cold, as winter as death. What I propose, he said softly, dangerously, voice carrying absolute authority, is that you remember who rules here, and that questioning my judgment is questioning my crown. If you want to challenge me, do it now. I'll accommodate you. The room went very quiet, tense with potential violence. Riker turned to me, and his expression softened like sun breaking through clouds. But this isn't my decision alone. Serafina, you have choices. You've always had choices, even when others tried to take them from you. He gestured to Lyra, who slid a document across the table toward me with careful hands. I picked it up, scanning the elegant script, the careful legal language. New identity. Sarah Mitchell. New pack affiliation in Oregon's coastal territory, far from Montana, and Damien and everything that had happened. $300,000 in cash. Complete severing of any connection to Riker, to this court, to the Moonstone Summit. Freedom. True freedom. Everything I dreamed of during those years with Damien, during those months of running. You and Maya could disappear. Riker said quietly, voice neutral, not trying to influence me. Start over. Live quietly. No one would find you. I'd make sure of it. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his face. Or you stay, but not as my possession or my political pawn, as my equal, my partner in rule. We rebuild what's between us on your terms with your consent and let it become whatever it's meant to be. The Alphas around the table shifted, uneasily uncomfortable with the idea. An Omega as equal partner to the Alpha King violated every tradition they knew, every belief they held. And if I choose neither, I asked quietly, testing, probing, if I want something else entirely? Riker smiled, slightly proud of the question. Then we figure that out too, together. I looked at the document in my hands, my escape route carefully planned and legally binding. Everything I'd wanted 6 months ago when I was running scared with $200 in a stolen truck. Then I looked at Riker, at the man who'd trained me to fight, who'd kept his promises, who'd walked into a cursed bunker at my side, and trusted me to know my own power, my own mind. I set the document down and let shadows pool in my palm, visible controlled a demonstration rather than a threat. I'm tired of hiding, I said, voice carrying to every corner. Tired of being told I'm too dangerous, too broken, too wrong to exist in the light, to have a voice to matter. I closed my fist and the shadows dissipated like smoke, like they'd never been. The Dark Omega bloodline was nearly destroyed because Alphas decided we were monsters without ever giving us the chance to be anything else, without ever asking what we might become if given the choice. I met the eyes of each Alpha around the table one by one. I choose to stay. Not because of prophecy or politics or the bond forming between Riker and me, though that's real and terrifying and something I want to explore, something I want to see where it leads. I straightened, feeling the weight of what I was about to say, the commitment I was making. I choose to stay because I'm done letting fear dictate my life, mine or yours. And if my presence here makes you uncomfortable, if the idea of a Dark Omega with a voice and power threatens your worldview, I smiled, sharp as broken glass, as certain as sunrise. Then perhaps it's your worldview that needs to change, not me. Riker moved around the table to stand beside me, not touching, but close enough that I could feel his warmth, his support. Those are her terms, and I accept them. Do you? This is unprecedented, someone muttered, but without real heat. Good, Aryan, Riker said, voice carrying that tone that commanded armies, that built kingdoms. It's time for some precedents to change. He addressed the assembled Alphas with the voice that had never been denied. Serafina will have a formal position on my council, representing not just Omegas, but any wolf who's been told they're less because of their rank or their gifts. Her voice will carry equal weight to mine in matters that affect the packs. This is not negotiable. You're rewriting pack law for an Omega, Darius said, but his voice had lost its earlier conviction, its certainty. I'm rewriting pack law because it's long overdue. Riker's tone brooked no argument, no dissent. The vote is simple. Accept these terms or consider whether you want to remain allied with my court. Choose now. It wasn't really a vote. It was an ultimatum from the most powerful Alpha in the Northern Rockies, from a king who'd just proven he could walk through fire. One by one, the Alphas around the table nodded their acceptance. Some grudging, some genuinely supportive. All of them smart enough to recognize when a battle was already lost, when history was being made. When the room finally cleared, leaving just Riker, Lyra, and me, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. That went better than expected, Lyra said dryly, gathering her papers. I thought at least 3 of them would challenge you to single combat. The night's young, I muttered, but I was smiling despite everything. Riker laughed, the sound warm and genuine and full of relief. When Lyra excused herself with a knowing smile, he turned to me fully. No more audience, no more witnesses. A month, he said quietly. That was the timeline you gave me to court you properly before asking. It's been 4 weeks and 2 days. Close enough. Close enough, I confirmed, heart hammering. He took my hand, thumb tracing gentle patterns across my palm in a gesture that had become familiar over weeks of training and fighting and learning to trust, to hope. Serafina, I'm not asking you to accept a bond tonight or even tomorrow, but I am asking permission to try, to see if what we've built in training yards and war rooms and cursed bunkers can become something more, something lasting. What if I'm not ready? I whispered, voicing the fear. Then I wait. I'm very patient when something matters. His eyes held mine steady and certain. And you matter, more than anything. I looked at our joined hands, at the man who'd become my anchor and my equal, who'd given me choices when everyone else demanded surrender, who'd trusted me when everyone else demanded control. Ask me anyway, I said, the words feeling right even though they scared me. Ask me properly. Riker's eyes widened slightly, hope and caution warring. Are you sure? No, but I'm done letting fear make my decisions. I closed the distance between us, choosing him, choosing this, choosing us. So ask me, Riker. Ask me properly. He cupped my face in his hands, the gesture so familiar now, but still making my breath catch, still making my heart race. Serafina Ashford, he said, voice rough, with emotion he didn't try to hide. Will you let me court you? Not as my possession or my political partner, but as the woman who's made me want to be more than a weapon, with a crown more than the Stone King. Will you give me the chance to prove that what's between us is real? That it matters enough to fight for? Yes, I said, and kissed him before he could say anything else, before either of us could think better of it. This kiss wasn't desperate like that first one in the Great Hall. Wasn't strategic or staged for witnesses, wasn't about politics or survival. It was a choice made freely, witnessed by no one but the morning sun streaming through the war room windows, blessed by nothing but our own wanting. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Riker rested his forehead against mine, a smile in his voice. 4 weeks and 2 days, he murmured. Worth the wait, worth everything. I laughed, feeling lighter than I had in years and forever. Don't get cocky. You still have to actually court me. I have very high standards, remember? I remember. His smile was soft and promising and full of future. I'm up for the challenge. I'm ready for whatever comes next. Good, because I'm not going to make it easy. I'd expect nothing less. 6 months transformed the Moonstone Court from a place that made my skin crawl into something that almost felt like home, like belonging. The Great Hall buzzed with conversation as alphas, betas, and for the first time in living memory, omegas from across the realm gathered for the Winter Council. But the tension that had crackled through the air during my first visit was gone, replaced by something cautiously optimistic. Wary perhaps, but no longer hostile, no longer afraid. I sat beside Riker at the high table, not behind him or below him, but truly beside him. My throne matched his, now equal in size, equal in placement, equal in every way that mattered. The symbolism hadn't been lost on anyone, had sparked debates and discussions and slow, grudging change. Maya sat 3 seats down, representing the younger generation. She'd flourished in the months since Black Ridge training with Kieran and discovering she had her own gifts, not shadows like mine, but an empathic sense that could read emotions and intentions with frightening accuracy. She'd already stopped 2 potential conflicts by sensing underlying fears before they escalated into challenges had become invaluable to the council. Riker stood in the hall, quieted immediately. His presence still commanded attention, but there was something different in how he wielded it now. Less domination, more invitation. Less fear, more respect. 6 months ago, he began voice carrying to every corner. I stood in this hall and made choices that many of you questioned. Some still question them. He glanced at me, warmth flickering in his winter storm eyes and the slight smile. I claimed protection over an Omega I'd just met. I brought her into my inner circle. I gave her a voice at my table. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some approving, others still uncertain, all of them listening. Today, I'm here to announce that those choices were merely the beginning, the foundation of something larger. Riker gestured to Lyra, who stood with a thick document, the product of months of work. We're implementing reforms across all allied territories. First, forced bonds are now punishable by exile or death, regardless of the perpetrator's rank. No wolf alpha, beta, or omega will be claimed without explicit ongoing consent. This is law. The hall erupted. Some alphas cheered. Others looked thunderous, resistant to change. Riker waited for silence before continuing, patient and immovable. Second omega representation will be mandatory on all pack councils. Their voices matter. Their perspectives matter. This is not a suggestion. It's law. I stood then, shadows coiling visibly around my arms, in a display of controlled power that still made some wolves flinch, still made some uncomfortable. But most had learned to read it as I intended, not a threat, but a promise of protection, a symbol of change. Third, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the massive space. Any wolf presenting with unusual gifts, shadow manipulation, empathic abilities, elemental control, anything considered different will be offered training rather than exile or execution. We're establishing an academy here at Fort Valor where gifted wolves can learn control and find community, where they can be themselves without fear. The reforms continued one after another. Protections for lower ranks, resources for packs struggling with territory disputes, trade agreements that benefited smaller communities instead of just the powerful. Each change built on the idea that strength didn't mean domination. It meant lifting others up, building instead of destroying. Hours later, after the formal session ended and wolves mingled in smaller groups, Riker found me on the balcony overlooking the courtyard, seeking the quiet after the noise. The same balcony where I'd first stood during that awful summit, feeling like prey among predators, counting minutes until I could escape. Tired, he asked, sliding his arm around my waist in a gesture that had become natural over months of stolen moments and deliberate courtship of learning each other. Exhausted, exhilarated, both. I leaned into him, watching the crowd below, watching history being made in small conversations. Omegas talking openly with alphas, sharing ideas instead of just serving wine. Maya laughing with a group of young wolves who hung on her every word, who saw her as leader and friend. Kieran demonstrating a defensive move to an omega who'd asked to learn to fight, who'd decided she wanted to be strong. Remember the first time you stood in that hall? Riker murmured against my hair, voice intimate and warm. I was terrified, trying to disappear, counting the minutes until I could escape. And then you saw your ex and begged a stranger to kiss you. I turned in his arms to face him, to see him in the fading light. I thought I was making a desperate mistake, trading one danger for another, one cage for another. And now I know it was the best mistake I ever made. I smiled up at him, meaning it with everything in me. You were supposed to be a shield for one night. Instead, you became my anchor, my partner. Your mate, he finished softly, hopefully, though we'd been dancing around the word for weeks, both knowing but not quite ready to say it. We hadn't formalized the bond yet, hadn't done the public ceremony or exchanged marks. But everyone could see it, the way we moved together, finished each other's sentences, balanced each other's strengths and weaknesses. The way we'd built something real from nothing, from desperation and hope. The bond hummed between us, constantly recognized, if not yet sealed, waiting for us to be ready. My mate, I confirmed, and watched his eyes flash gold with his wolf's joy, with certainty and belonging. He kissed me then, soft and deep, a promise and a celebration. Not the desperate kiss of that first night, not the strategic claim before witnesses. This was choice freely given, witnessed by a realm that was slowly learning what we'd discovered in training yards, in war rooms, in cursed bunkers, in quiet moments and violent ones. Power shared was stronger than power hoarded. Love given freely was stronger than control taken by force. When we finally pulled apart, I noticed wolves watching from below, not with judgment or fear, but with something that looked like hope, like possibility. Omegas seeing themselves reflected in a queen who'd risen from abuse to stand beside the most powerful alpha in the realm. Alphas witnessing a partnership that made them both stronger, that proved the old ways weren't the only ways. They're learning, Riker said, following my gaze, seeing what I saw. We all are. I agreed, feeling the weight and the joy of it. I turned back to him, shadows and moonlight dancing across my skin, power and peace existing together. 6 months ago, I couldn't have imagined this. Standing here with you, having a voice, being seen as something other than broken or dangerous, being seen as whole. You were never broken. His thumb traced my cheekbone, gentle and reverent. Just caged. And now you're free. We're free. We're free, I corrected, because this was ours, not mine alone. Together. He smiled, that rare, genuine expression that transformed his whole face from stone to warmth, from king to man. Together then, always. Always, I agreed and meant it like a vow. The blood moon had risen over cursed bunkers 6 months ago, witnessing my transformation from terrified Omega to dark Omega Queen, from victim to survivor to something more. Tonight, a gentle silver moon blessed the Moonstone Court, illuminating a realm that was learning slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely that the old ways didn't have to be the only ways. That change was possible. That hope could triumph over fear. I'd begged a stranger for a kiss to escape my past to survive one more night. Now I kissed my mate, my partner, my Alpha King by choice, building a future neither of us could have imagined alone, building something that mattered. And somewhere in the crowd below, I knew there were other wolves watching, other Omegas who'd been told they were less, other gifted wolves who'd been taught to hide, other survivors wondering if they too could rise. They were watching and wondering if they too could be seen, if they too could be free. The answer was written in every reform we'd passed, every barrier we'd broken, every tradition we'd dared to question, every choice we'd made to be better. Yes, yes, you can rise. Yes, you can be seen. Yes, you can be free. The realm was changing, one wolf at a time and one choice at a time. And we were just getting started.